Now we're going to talk about encoding and decoding strings. If you want to pass several words as one variable value, or if you want to use special characters, you need to apply the URL encode function. As its name implies, this function takes a string and it encodes it or changes its format so that it can properly be passed as part of a URL. Among other things, the function replaces spaces with plus signs and translates special characters. So if you had something like an apostrophe or an ampersand, it would change it into a less problematic version. We can use this function in this way, where you're just going to use the URL encode function and pass on whatever variable or value that you want to encode. We're going to update our original form parser.php file so that it creates a link that passes the user's name and email address onto a third page. I've gotten rid of the HTML entities and strip tags and HTML special characters that we were using in the last set of exercises. So now we're just back to kind of our plain form that is going to take the user's information, and when they click send, it's going to print it to the PHP page. We're going to change this script so that it encodes two variables before adding them to a link, and then those values are going to be successfully passed on to a third page. After my print statement, I'm going to add a couple of new variables. So what we want to do is we want to pass both of these variables on to a second page, and in order for this to work, we need to encode both of these variables. Because the script has not previously referred to or used the email variable, we're going to both encode the email variable and retrieve it using the post array. So in one step, we're going to encode and retrieve the email variable. This would be the same as having two separate lines of code. One that would do something like take the name, like we have here, and then we would need to encode the name again. Now we're encoding our concatenated first and last name, so we're going to use URL encode on that name variable that takes both the first and the last name. Then we're going to create a print statement that is going to create the link to this third page. So I'll use my print statement, and I'm going to ask the user to click, and then we're just going to link to a page called thanks.php, and you'll notice right here that I'm taking name and I'm making it equal to the name variable, and then I'm using the ampersand and I'm taking email and I'm making it equal to the email variable. The primary purpose of this print statement is to create an HTML link to the third web page. To accomplish this, we're going to begin by hand coding most of the HTML, and then we're going to include the appropriate variable names. Because the HTML code requires that the URL for the link be in double quotation marks, I have to escape the double quotation marks, and I'm going to use my backslash in order for that to happen. If we save our page now and we go back to our form and we fill it out and we click send it, you can see that now we have a new paragraph. And of course, if we click this link, we're going to get an error because there is no thanks.php page found, so we'll need to make that. It is worth noting though that when I click here, if we look up into the URL field, you can see that the information is being passed on. So name is set equal to Joe plus Smith, and then we're adding on the email, and you can see that that's equal to, and then here it's printing a space and it's saying Joe Smith, and then it's going to print the special character for @ and then it's going to print the gmail.com, which is the email address that was entered in our form. So any value that's sent directly from the form, they're going to automatically URL encode prior to being sent, and then they're going to decode upon arrival at the receiving script. We only need the URL encode function to ensure that that is going to work. It's worth noting that there also is a URL decode function that does the opposite of the URL encode. It's going to take an encoded URL and turn it back into a standard form. we're going to use that less frequently because PHP automatically decodes most values it receives. And because we can use concatenation with functions, we could also write the print statement in this way. Instead of writing it how we wrote it up here, I could concatenate using my period. This method has an added benefit over the original approach that I just showed you. First, it's going to use single quotation marks to start and stop the statement, meaning that we don't need to escape the double quotation marks. And second, the variables are going to be a lot more obvious. They're not going to be buried inside of a bunch of other code. So I'm just going to comment the first line out. I'll save this page, and if we go back and submit the form, and let's just say this is now Jane Smith, and we'll change the email address as well, and we'll click OK. And you can see that the statement is updated, and when I click my here link, it's now going to do the same thing. It's basically parsing in that variable information and passing it on into the URL. It is worth noting that you don't need to encode numeric PHP values in order to use them in a URL because they're not going to contain problematic characters, but it doesn't hurt to encode them either. So if you're not sure, it's probably better just to encode them. So now we're going to go ahead and create the thanks.php page, which just is going to greet the user by name and email address. This is going to print a message based on the values it receives in the URL. So I will create a new page. I'm just going to save this page and we're going to call it thanks.php, and I'll save it in my directory. I'm going to set up a basic HTML page, and inside our body tag we'll open up our PHP tags, and I like to close them right away just so I don't forget to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to have our name and email variables, and we're going to use the get array method, and we're going to get whatever information was passed into these. And then so that we can see this, we'll use a print statement, which is simply going to say, thank you, whatever your name is, we'll contact you at, and print the email. So I'm going to save this page. And now if we fill out the form and click here to continue, it's going to take us to that page. So you can see that it says, thank you, Jane Smith, we'll contact you at, and it's going to print the email address. So now this form is working and it's passing on the information to another page, and we're encoding and decoding some of the information that was passed through the form. If you want your form to be formatted, you could simply add the link to your CSS file as well. I didn't do that, but if I do that, now when I refresh my page, it's just going to format the text with whatever CSS rules exist. It also might be nice to make the email link an actual active link, and we could do that by simply adding in the a href. So if we want the email link to be an actual link, I could still write the same message saying thank you, name, we'll contact you, and then in the mail to : I'm going to pass in the email address, and I will escape the closing quotes and then add the closing tag for the opening a tag, and then I'm going to concatenate in my actual email, and then we'll concatenate in the closing a tag and the closing p tag. So if we save our page and we refresh in the browser, you can now see that this is a link, and if you notice at the bottom of my browser, it's actually a real email link. So if I clicked this, it would launch my email application and I could actually send the email. So now you can see that our third page is going to print a message based on values that it's receiving from a URL, which are being generated from our form parser.php page and sending that information over to the thanks page.